There's a cheese in your fridge right now that, by Italian law, isn't even cheese. It's filed under the same legal category as a leftover. And it's in your lasagna. That's ricotta, and we'll get to why in a minute. But it's not the only one hiding something. Italy makes hundreds of cheeses, and the famous ones all carry a story the label leaves out. One of them is so valuable, a bank keeps 400,000 of them in a vault behind barbed wire. One was invented because a guy got snowed in. One is named after a horse. We're going through the 10 worth knowing, what's actually in them, and the part nobody mentions. Parmigiano Reggiano, the one banks treat like gold. Start with the king because the nickname isn't marketing. In Italy, there's a bank, Credito Emiliano, that lets cheesemakers walk in and use wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano as collateral for a loan. Real loans, real money against cheese. The bank stores it, ages it, and even has people who taste it to check it's healthy. At full capacity, that vault holds hundreds of thousands of wheels worth well over 100 million euros. Why would a bank do that? Because a real wheel takes around 140 gallons of milk, weighs about 84 pounds, and has to age at least a year before anyone can sell it. That's a year of money just sitting on a shelf. The bank fronts the cash so the farmer doesn't go broke waiting. The cheese is that reliable a thing to bet on. Benedictine monks worked this out in the Middle Ages. They needed a cheese that wouldn't rot over a long winter, so they made one so hard and so dry, it could basically outlive them. Which raises a fair question about its quieter cousin, the one that looks almost identical and costs half as much. Is it a knockoff? Grana Padano, the fake that isn't fake. That cousin is Grana Padano. And no, it's not a knockoff. It's older. Monks in the Po Valley were making it back in the 12th century, again to deal with milk they couldn't use fast enough. It's softer on the rules than Parmigiano. It can come from a much bigger area, the cows can eat a wider diet, and it can age for less time. That's why it's cheaper and a little milder. So here's the thing most people get backwards. Grana Padano isn't trying to be Parmigiano and falling short. It's its own cheese that happens to look the same. It's also one of the highest selling cheeses in all of Europe, which means the lesser one quietly wins on volume. The expensive one wins the argument. The cheap one wins the kitchen. Mozzarella di Bufala, made from an animal that shouldn't be there. Now drop south to Naples, because the best mozzarella in Italy isn't made from cows. It's made from water buffalo, which is strange when you think about it. Water buffalo are an Asian animal. Nobody can fully agree on how herds of them ended up in the swamps south of Naples centuries ago, but they thrived in the marshland, and their milk turned out to be richer and creamier than cow's milk. That's the whole secret of real buffalo mozzarella. Softer, wetter, a little tangy, and so fragile it's best eaten the same day it's made. This is the stuff on a true Neapolitan pizza and in a proper caprese salad. Which sets up an obvious problem. If the good one falls apart in hours and barely survives a trip across town, how does the rest of the world put mozzarella on every pizza on Earth? Mozzarella Fior di Latte, the workhorse that conquered the planet. The answer is the version made from cow's milk, Fior di Latte. The name means flower of the milk, which is generous for what is basically the practical option. It's lighter, less tangy, and it holds together better. Most importantly, it lets go of less water when it melts. That last detail is the entire reason it took over the world. Wet cheese makes soggy pizza. Cow's milk mozzarella melts into that clean, even, stretchy layer without flooding the crust. So when Italian-American pizza went global last century, this is the cheese that rode along. The fancy one stayed home in Naples. The reliable one got on the boat. You've almost certainly eaten more of the workhorse than the king. Gorgonzola, the cheese that started as a mistake. Back north now, near Milan, for Italy's great blue cheese. The blue veins running through Gorgonzola, that's mold. On purpose. We grow it inside the cheese deliberately. And the story goes that the whole thing began as an accident centuries ago. Cheese left somewhere it shouldn't have been, mold crept in, and somebody was either too poor or too curious to throw it out. They tasted it instead. That gamble is now an entire category. Young Gorgonzola is soft and almost sweet. Aged longer, it turns sharp, spicy, the kind of bite that makes your whole mouth wake up. It's Italy's direct answer to French Roquefort, and the rivalry is real. But mold-making cheese better is tame compared to the next one, where the strange part isn't the cheese at all. It's the lie in the name. Ricotta, the leftover pretending to be cheese. Back to the one we opened with. Ricotta means recooked, and that name is the confession. When you make most cheese, you split the milk into curds and a watery liquid called whey, and you keep the curds. The whey is the leftover. Ricotta is what you get when you take that leftover and cook it a second time until the last bits of protein come together. That's why Italian law won't call it a cheese. Cheese comes from curds. Ricotta comes from the stuff left after the cheese is already made, so it's officially a byproduct, a thing made from another thing's scraps. And it's brilliant because nothing got wasted. Poor farmers turned garbage water into the soft, sweet filling in your cannoli, your ravioli, your cheesecake, which is the quiet pattern under half of Italian food. The best stuff often came from people who couldn't afford to throw anything away. Mascarpone, barely a cheese, basically dessert. If ricotta is barely cheese, mascarpone is barely trying. There's no aging, no mold, none of the usual process. You take cream, add a little acid, and it thickens into something somewhere between cheese and whipped butter. That's it. That's mascarpone. It comes from the same region as gorgonzola, but it lives a completely different life. It exists mostly to be the engine of tiramisu. When tiramisu blew up around the world late last century, this rich, spoonable cream rode its coattails into fame. Most people who eat it have no idea they're eating cheese at all. They think it's a dessert ingredient. Honestly, they're not wrong. Burrata, invented by accident twice over. Here's the one with the best origin story, even if the details are a little fuzzy. Burrata looks like a ball of mozzarella, but cut it open and the inside spills out. Soft shreds of cheese soaked in cream. The shell is solid. The center is a mess, in the good way. The story they tell in Puglia is that a cheesemaker got caught in heavy snow, couldn't get his dairy to market, and didn't want it all to spoil. So he took leftover scraps of mozzarella, packed them inside a pouch of fresh mozzarella with cream, and sealed it shut to buy time. The trapped cream kept everything fresh. Whether it really happened in a snowstorm or just got tidied up into a good legend, the point holds. Burrata is leftovers wrapped in more leftovers. It only became a fine dining superstar about a decade ago when restaurants discovered how it looks when it opens on the plate. A waste-saving trick for poor farmers is now the most photographed cheese on any menu. Pecorino Romano, Roman cheese that isn't made in Rome. This one's a bait and switch built into the name. Pecorino Romano is one of Italy's oldest cheeses, going back to ancient Rome, where soldiers carried it on the march because it was salty, sharp, packed with nutrition, and refused to spoil. It fed an army. It also comes from sheep's milk, not cows, which is where that punchy, almost spicy edge comes from. But Romano is misleading. Most of it today isn't made anywhere near Rome. It's made on the island of Sardinia, which has the huge sheep flocks the mainland doesn't. So the cheese named after the capital is mostly produced on an island a sea away. If you've had real cacio e pepe or a proper carbonara, this salty sheep cheese was doing the heavy lifting, no matter what the name on it claims. Caciocavallo, the cheese on horseback. Save the strangest name for last. Caciocavallo translates to cheese on horseback, which sounds like nonsense until you see how it's stored. The cheeses are made in a teardrop shape, tied together in pairs by a length of rope, and slung over a wooden beam to age. So they hang there in twos, draped over the pole like saddlebags on a horse. That's the whole name. People saw cheese sitting astride a beam and called it riding. It comes from the south, places like Calabria and Sicily, and it's the same stretched curd family as mozzarella and provolone, just hung up and aged until it goes firm. Young, it's mild. Old, it's sharp and often smoked. It's the kind of cheese a shepherd could make in the hills, hang from a rafter, and forget about until winter. The part that lingers. So go back through the list. The most valuable one sits in a bank vault. The most famous one fled its hometown so it could travel. The fanciest one on the menu is technically leftovers in a bag. And the one in your lasagna isn't legally a cheese at all. Almost none of these came from someone trying to make something luxurious. They came from monks stretching milk through winter, soldiers needing food that wouldn't rot, and broke farmers who couldn't afford to waste a single drop. The waste-not tricks of people with nothing became the thing rich people now pay a fortune for. Which makes you wonder what's sitting in your fridge right now, labeled like it's ordinary, that someone 300 years from now will call a delicacy.